The sun hung low in the sky, stretching long shadows across the cracked pavement of a desert highway. The heat of the day still lingered, rising in shimmering waves from the asphalt, but the air carried a hint of the cool night to come. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a lonely ribbon of blacktop cutting through the barren golden expanse. There were no city lights, no honking car horns, no distractions, just the vast open land and the low, steady rumble of a powerful V2 twin engine. Keanu Reeves leaned into the handlebars of his arch KR-GT1, the bike responding like an extension of himself. The rhythmic hum of the engine vibrated through his body, grounding him, silencing the noise of the world he had left behind. Riding wasn't just a pastime for him, it was a necessity, a way to strip everything down to the essentials. Out here, there were no cameras, no scripts, no expectations, just the rider, the machine, and the road. The wind whipped against his leather jacket, the scent of sun-baked earth and distant gasoline drifting through the air. It was moments like these that reminded him why he rode. To escape, to reset, to remember who he was beneath the layers of fame. As the sun dipped lower, the gas gauge flickered, pulling him from his thoughts. He should have refueled back in the last town, but the call of the open road had been too strong. Scanning the horizon, he spotted a small, weathered gas station a few miles ahead, sitting in solitude among scattered tumbleweeds. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He didn't know it yet, but trouble was waiting for him there. Keanu coasted into the gas station, his motorcycle gliding over the loose gravel with practiced ease. The place was a relic of a bygone era. Paint peeling from the wooden facade, a faded Coca-Cola sign hanging crookedly above a dusty vending machine. The only signs of life were the slow creak of an ancient gas pump in the dry desert air and a small group of bikers lounging in the shade of a rusted-out awning. There were 6 of them, their presence undeniable. Their bikes, heavily customized with skull decals, iron crosses, and spiked handlebars, were parked haphazardly in a row, their engines still warm. The men matched their machines. Rough, sunburned, clad in weathered leather vests with patches that read Road Wraiths. They weren't just riders, they were the kind of men who lived by their own set of rules. Men who tested boundaries just to see who would push back. Keanu barely spared them a glance as he pulled up to the pump. He wasn't here to make friends, and he definitely wasn't looking for trouble. He shut off the engine, swung his leg over the seat, and reached for the fuel nozzle. As the gas flowed into the tank, he could feel their eyes on him, assessing, calculating. The once lively conversation near the picnic tables had quieted, replaced by murmured exchanges and low chuckles. Then, a voice cut through the stillness. "A nice ride," one of them called out. The man was tall, broad-shouldered with a thick beard and tattooed arms. His leather vest was worn, the patch on his chest slightly frayed. There was an edge to his voice. Not admiration, but something more predatory. Keanu didn't look up. He had been in situations like this before. He knew that the best response was no response at all. "Little too nice for a guy like you, don't you think?" the bearded man added, his tone sharper now. The group laughed, a rough, mocking sound that carried across the open desert. Another biker, younger and wiry, pushed away from the table and took a few steps closer. His boots crunched against the gravel. "What's a guy like you doing out here alone?" he asked, his voice casual but his posture anything but. "You lost or something?" Keanu finished fueling, replaced the nozzle, and wiped his hands on a rag from his saddlebag. Only then did he acknowledge them. His gaze swept over the group, reading their stances, their eyes. They weren't drunk, but they were itching for something. Maybe a thrill, maybe a fight. He'd seen men like this before. "Just passing through," he said, his voice calm, measured, not looking for trouble. The bearded leader smirked, exchanging a glance with his crew. "Yeah, well, sometimes trouble finds you." Another ripple of laughter. Keanu ignored it, turning back toward his bike. Then the leader stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. His boots thudded against the ground as he approached. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You sure about that?" he asked. Keanu didn't answer right away. He adjusted his gloves, taking his time. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, devoid of fear. "Appreciate the compliment," he said, swinging his leg back over his bike. For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and heavy like the desert heat. Then the bearded man chuckled, shaking his head. "See you around, stranger," he said. Keanu fired up the engine, the deep rumble filling the still air. He didn't look back as he pulled onto the highway. But something told him this wasn't over. The desert stretched endlessly in both directions, a vast and empty expanse under the fading orange glow of the setting sun. The cool evening air had begun to settle, but tension crackled hotter than the heat still radiating from the asphalt. Keanu rode steadily, the rhythmic hum of his Arch KRGT-1 a familiar comfort beneath him. He was miles from the gas station now, but he could still feel the weight of their stares, hear the mocking laughter that had followed him as he left. He had been around men like them before, ones who thrived on intimidation, who fed off the reactions of others, and men like that rarely let things go. A flicker in his side mirror caught his attention, then another. He adjusted the angle, narrowing his gaze. At first, it was just a blur, distant shapes against the horizon, but soon, the unmistakable glow of headlights emerged, multiplying, closing in fast. Then came the sound, a deep, guttural rumble growing louder with every passing second. They were coming for him. Keanu exhaled through his nose, calm, collected. He wasn't surprised. Within moments, the bikers were on him, their motorcycles roaring like a pack of wild animals. They flanked him on either side, cutting close, swerving aggressively, their laughter and taunts rising over the wind. One of them, a wiry man with a scar down his cheek, sped up alongside him, leaning in just close enough to make himself heard. "You're on the wrong road, old man," he sneered. "Should have paid your toll." Keanu ignored him, his focus sharp. He wasn't looking for a fight, but if they pushed him, he'd end it. The leader, the bearded man from the gas station, pulled ahead and suddenly threw a hand signal. In an instant, the group shifted, tightening their formation. One cut in front of him, another veered dangerously close to his right side, boxing him in. A tussle. And Keanu kept his expression neutral, his hands steady on the grips. Then, smoothly, he rolled off the throttle just slightly, just enough to let them surge ahead, thinking they had him trapped. The leader grinned back at him. "Where you gonna go now?" Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he made his move. He downshifted hard, twisting the throttle as he pulled sharply left. His bike surged forward, breaking free from the pack. He swerved behind them, using their own momentum against them, forcing them to correct their course. Scarface cursed, jerking his handlebars to keep from colliding with his own crew. Another rider wobbled, nearly losing control before regaining balance. Keanu didn't slow down. He had the opening he needed. The leader snarled, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered. "Get him!" he barked. One biker pulled a chain from his belt, swinging it threateningly as he raced forward. Another reached into his jacket, fingers closing around something, maybe a weapon, maybe not. But Keanu wasn't about to find out. With practiced precision, he braked just enough to let the biker with the chain overshoot, then kicked back into gear, leaning hard into the turn. The biker panicked, overcorrecting, and his rear wheel caught loose gravel. He skidded violently, his bike fishtailing before he lost control completely, tumbling across the pavement in a storm of sparks and curses. The others hesitated for just a second, long enough. Keanu took advantage, twisting the throttle wide open. The Arch roared beneath him, its custom V-twin engine unleashing raw power onto the open road. The bikers tried to keep up, but it was too late. He was already gone. The leader, still riding hard, let out a furious curse, watching as Keanu disappeared into the horizon, his taillight growing smaller by the second. This wasn't over, but they had just learned the hard way. Some roads weren't meant to be crossed. The desert night had settled in, blanketing the landscape in a cool, eerie stillness. The open road stretched ahead, illuminated only by the pale glow of the moon and the steady beam of Keanu's headlight. His Arch KRGT-1 hummed beneath him, a powerful, reassuring presence. The tension of the encounter still clung to him, though he had left the gang of bikers behind miles ago. But he knew better than to think it was over. Then it came, the sound he had been expecting. At first, just a distant murmur, a faint tremor in the air. Then it grew. A low, growling chorus of engines, gaining speed, gaining ground. In his rearview mirror, the darkness fractured into multiple glowing headlights. 6. No, more than 6. They were back. Keanu took a steady breath. He didn't tense, didn't panic. He just felt the wind in his face, the rumble of the road beneath his tires, the calculated weight of the situation pressing down on him. The bikers closed in quickly, their machines slicing through the night like predators on a hunt. This wasn't just a show of force anymore. Their formation was tighter, their movements sharper. The easy bravado they had carried before was gone. What had started as a game had turned into something personal. This time, they wanted blood. The bearded leader pulled up beside him, his expression darker now, stripped of amusement. He didn't speak, just stared, his jaw tight, his fingers flexing over the handlebars. Then he jerked his bike toward Keanu, a sharp, aggressive feint, a warning. Keanu didn't flinch. He kept his grip firm, his movements controlled. If they wanted a reaction, they weren't going to get one. Behind him, another biker revved his engine and swerved closer. "You think you could just ride off, huh?" he shouted over the wind. "You embarrassed us back there." Keanu's gaze stayed forward. "You embarrassed yourselves," he said simply. That struck a nerve. The biker's face twisted with anger. "You're gonna regret this, old man." The leader finally spoke, his voice like gravel. "You should have just handed over the bike." Keanu exhaled slowly. "And you should have just walked away." The leader's expression hardened. He gave a small nod, and the group moved. One biker surged ahead, cutting into Keanu's path, forcing him to brake. Another swung in from the right, attempting to squeeze him toward the shoulder. They were hurting him, boxing him in. Keanu let it happen. He read their movements, let them think they had control. Then, at the last second, he acted. He downshifted sharply and twisted the throttle, surging forward between two riders before they could react. His bike roared as he weaved through the pack, breaking free from their trap. One of the bikers swore loudly, scrambling to catch up. Another yanked a length of chain from his belt, swinging it dangerously. Keanu glanced at his side mirror. Their frustration was boiling over. They weren't just trying to intimidate him now. They were trying to take him down. The road ahead stretched into darkness, and Keanu knew he had a decision to make. Either outrun him or end this. And he had never been the type to run. The night was thick with tension, the hum of Keanu's engine steady beneath him as he prepared for whatever came next. The gang behind him wasn't going to back off. Not after the way he had humiliated them. He could feel the weight of their anger pressing against his back, their headlights glaring through the darkness like hunting dogs locked onto their... Then, another sound emerged. It started low, barely distinguishable from the desert wind, but it grew, a deep, steady rumble, different from the erratic aggression of the bikers behind him. This wasn't the desperate roar of men looking for a fight. This was something else, something controlled, purposeful. Keanu recognized it instantly. A line of motorcycles crested the hill ahead, their headlights piercing through the darkness. 6 of them, moving as one. Their formation was disciplined, their presence undeniable. As they rolled down the highway, their engines merged into a single, powerful symphony of authority. Keanu didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. His crew, the real riders, the kind who didn't need to posture or intimidate because they had nothing to prove, men who lived by the unspoken code of the road: respect, loyalty, and knowing when to step in. The leader of the group pulled up first, his weathered face unreadable beneath his helmet. He scanned the scene, the gang behind Keanu, the tension in the air. Then turned to him with a smirk. "Late to the party?" he asked. Keanu exhaled, a slow, knowing smile playing at his lips. Right on time. The dust had barely settled, but the night had already shifted. The air, once thick with hostility, now carried something else. An unspoken understanding, a quiet resolution. Keanu stood beside his arch KRGT1, his gloved hand running over the scratched surface, feeling the dents left behind by the night's events. The bike could be fixed. The damage was nothing compared to the weight of what had just transpired. The road wraiths, battered and humiliated, lingered for a moment longer. Their leader, his confidence now a hollow shell, locked eyes with Keanu. His hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight, but even he knew when to let go. With a sharp nod to his men, he turned, mounted his bike, and rode off into the darkness. One by one, the others followed, their engines fading into the desert night, their presence dissolving like smoke in the wind. Keanu watched them disappear, then turned to his own crew. The real riders, the ones who didn't need threats to command respect. They stood beside him, silent but present, waiting. They had arrived when it mattered, not to fight his battles for him, but to remind him that he wasn't alone. The leader of his crew, a man who had seen his share of fights, crossed his arms and smirked. "Think they'll come back?" Keanu shook his head. "Not tonight." The leader nodded, glancing at Keanu's bike. "Shame about the damage." Keanu ran his fingers over the dented exhaust pipe, then exhaled slowly. "It's just a bike," he said. "Nothing that can't be fixed." But deep down, he knew the real damage had been done to the men who had ridden off in shame. Not to their bikes, not even to their bodies, but to their pride. Because they had learned something tonight. Strength wasn't about brute force, it wasn't about taking what you wanted or making others fear you. Real strength was restraint, knowing when to act, knowing when to walk away. Keanu had faced men like them before. He knew the look in their eyes as they left, not just anger, but confusion, because he had taken everything they threw at him and hadn't given them what they wanted in return. Fiero, satisfaction, a reason to keep going. Instead, he had given them a choice to learn from it or to repeat it. That part was on them. His crew knew it too. They didn't dwell on it, they didn't need to. The road was calling. As Keanu mounted his bike, the night stretched out before them, an open, endless road full of possibility. He twisted the throttle, feeling the familiar hum beneath him, the rhythmic pulse of freedom. Because at the end of the day, that's all it ever was. Just a man, his machine, and the road ahead.